members, the question is that the Chief Minister's amendment to Ms Lee's amendment to the Chief Minister's motion be agreed to, and I call Mr Pedersen.
Thank you, Mr Assistant Speaker. Support for territory rights means that you support the democratically elected ACT Legislative Assembly's power to make decisions for the residents of the ACT. It doesn't mean you support every decision that this body makes. It simply means you support the right to make those decisions. Territory rights is also synonymous with respect for the democratic rights of ACT residents. It means you believe Canberrans deserve the same democratic rights as Australians who live in one of the states. In this country, where you live should not determine how much democracy or self-determination you get. Now, members, too often this chamber has been accused of being an immature parliament. Some Conservative politicians like to refer to it as nothing more than a glorified council. How disrespectful. Now, to me, Mr Assistant Speaker, it takes a mature parliament to bestow decision-making upon another entity and then to respect the decisions they make. Now, it has been members of the federal parliament that have displayed this immaturity, not this Assembly. Now, of course, Mr Assistant Speaker, the reason we're having this debate today is because on the 14th of September, Senator Cash introduced the Australian Capital Territory Dangerous Drugs Bill 2023 to again seek to undermine ACT's democratic rights. And Mr Speaker, I'd like to pick up on some of the contributions made earlier about an alleged conspiracy between the Canberra Liberals in this chamber and Senator Cash. Now, I find the logic that the Canberra Liberals are putting forward quite humorous. Now, is it the view of the Canberra Liberals that there was no coordination between the two of them? Well, the funny thing for me is that's even more embarrassing, that the Federal Liberal Party has such little respect for the Canberra Liberals, they don't even pick the phone up. Now, if I was a leader of a political party in this place and my federal counterparts would not even call me, I would be deeply ashamed. Now, members, one of my proudest achievements in this place was the passage of the Drugs and Dependence Personal Cannabis Use Amendment Bill. It was quite the thing last term. No one wants to talk about it this term, that's all right. Everyone's moved on, and I'm happy about that. Introduced in 2018, voted on in 2019, and brought into effect in 2020. Now, as much as that was described as contentious at the time, it was not. Cannabis legalisation in the ACT is wildly popular. Some polling at the time put it at 54% support, with only 27% opposed. That's probably why we're not talking about it anymore, because those figures are 4 years old. No doubt, cannabis law reform is more popular now than it was back then. Now, when those laws passed, it was a very strange time in my life, I'll freely admit this. I woke up each day to piles of emails and requests to return phone calls from journalists because there was a steady stream of commentary from Conservative federal politicians. And for members' benefit, I've brought down a selection of some of my most favourite contributions during that period of time. Now, I direct members to a Guardian article on Thursday, 26th of September, titled, "Peter Dutton, Government May Override Dangerous ACT Decision to Legalise Cannabis." Now, Mr Dutton says, "I think it might be trendy for the ACT government to go down this path, and they'll say they're enlightened and progressive and all of the rest. I think it's dangerous." And Christian Porter is having a look at it at the moment. Now, Peter Dutton described the new laws as unconscionable, comments interpreted as urging the Attorney-General to challenge or overturn the laws passed on Wednesday. Now, Mr Porter, the then Attorney-General, played down but did not rule out the possibility of the Commonwealth directly overriding the laws. Mr Frydenberg, the then Treasurer, he thought it was fun to chime in as well. He said that the Morrison government does not support the laws and described drug use as criminal behaviour. And he said the federal government will review the laws to understand the true impact of them. Well, what about the then Attorney-General, Christian Porter himself? Now in his own words, when pressed on insiders, the then Attorney-General wouldn't answer questions about the government's intentions to intervene in the ACT's laws. Now, I think it should be straightforward for any politician, but apparently on that day for Mr. Porter, it was too hard. Now, he went even further in that interview with some, I think, disturbing scaremongering. He said that day, "I would expect that ACT policing will continue to enforce ACT and Commonwealth drug laws in accordance with their processes and procedures for investigating suspected breaches of criminal laws." The insinuation, of course, that the AFP were going to be knocking on people's doors, arresting them for cannabis possession, outrageous. One of my favourite contributions at the time was that of the then Federal Health Minister, Greg Hunt. Now, Greg Hunt was very concerned at the time. And my favourite contribution from Mr. Hunt was when he insinuated that he was going to sick the United Nations on the ACT for breaching international laws. Now, just outrageous. Here we are today talking about the federal government intervening in the affairs of the ACT government. Now we've got federal Liberal politicians insinuating we're going to have the United Nations interfering in the ACT's ability to make laws about ourselves. Another funny contribution from the time, I think this was about a couple of days after the laws passed, and credit to the former Deputy Prime Minister, Mr McCormack, on this one. This is actually the funniest contribution from the time. He said, "Here's the ACT government, probably spending too much time smoking hooch themselves, then wanting to go legalise the stuff." Credits to him, that's actually funny. But I think the most sensible contribution at the time, from all people, came from then Prime Minister Scott Morrison. Now, Scott Morrison addressed the National Press Club, and he said, when asked about these laws, "I've always been a federalist, and states will make their own decisions according to their own priorities and complexion of their own governments, and that's up to them." Now, of all the madness, somehow Scott Morrison is the only one who had the conviction to say that he's a small government conservative and does not want a big federal government. Now, for me, all of those comments were mainly sabre-rattling, because they were in government. They had the ability to introduce legislation. They probably had the support to get some type of law up if they were really determined to do so. But there's a reason they didn't do it. There is one simple reason that these Conservative politicians that disagreed with this law did not intervene. And it was not in respect of territory rights. It was simply because intervening in the ACT is wildly unpopular right across the country. There was polling done by Roy Morgan in October of 2019 that showed, polling right across the country, that only 27% of Australians wanted the ACT's cannabis laws overturned. 62% of the country thought the laws should stand. Australians get territory rights. It's a shame the Liberal Party broadly does not. Now, as mentioned, the reason we're having this debate today is because Senator Cash has introduced a bill in the Senate. This is political in nature. As is most politics, almost by definition, this is about politics. This is not a genuine attempt to try and change the laws of the ACT. This is right-wing scaremongering. This is a stunt. Now, it is hard to take these Conservative politicians seriously, both in the Commonwealth Parliament and here in the Assembly, when they have such a long track record of getting it wrong. When we changed our cannabis laws here in the ACT, the Liberal Party, in the Commonwealth Parliament and in this chamber, said that the sky would fall in. Now, that is not true. There was a lot of threats, there was a lot of sabre-rattling about intervention, and they ultimately did not follow through with them. And here we are, 4 years later, in near identical circumstances. The ACT Assembly has considered thoughtfully changes to our drug laws, progressed them in a very considered manner, and now we've got the federal Liberals once again sabre-rattling. Now, this is just disingenuous politics. It's frustrating. It's almost like deja vu, Mr. Assistant Speaker. We've been here before. We know how this ends. What has been surprising to me, however, is the approach that the Canberra Liberals have taken today. Seemingly, under Mr. Coe, there was a more thoughtful and considered approach to these matters. Today, what we're seeing is stunts, amendments on amendments on amendments. Mr. Assistant Speaker, I tell you what, I am looking forward to signing that letter, and I hope all members in this place do the same.